because synchronicity is really absolute in art. So there's an acausal parallelism. That's another sense. And some of these terms I'm kind of gradually moving along. For me, it's not, parallel means they're here and here, right? And maybe there's a tunnel between. I'm not talking so much about that, although these are interesting. This gets closer to it, an acausal connecting up togetherness is that everything's in this together. There's not like a unconscious and a conscious. Merleau-Ponty would talk about the less conscious. In other words, it's a transition through an atmosphere or a climate or a field. And it's a principle, which means it's not a rule, it's not hard and fast, it shifts and moves. And this is how I would teach as a teacher. It would be a lot about what was happening. And then you have to adjust your working, right, to fit the situation. And a co-occurrence. That's getting closer to what we want to talk about here.
Mike, we want to get you wired up.
Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't understand what you were
So
saying.
just put it on anywhere up there.
Well, can you catch it? Put it there.
Just here, grab this. Put it,
Oh,
hang it on you somewhere.
Yeah.
Okay.
Oh, I'm a little ahead of the game here.
That's all right.
So Jung goes back to Leibniz, and Leibniz, it took me a long time until I read a recent book on philosophy. Leibniz, I always thought was kind of weird because he had these monads, right? And the monads could only like see, like tunnel vision. But then I was reading a book called The Dream of Reason, right? And the emphasis on the dream, because we never really got to reason. But for Leibniz, it's about a harmony, a pre-established harmony. God manages everything. So it doesn't matter what we are. We're all part of this play, and God's in control, and things are just kind of happening, right? So now I understand Leibniz, and Jung goes back there to kind of pick up and say that's kind of an insight about this, but not the whole picture yet. So synchronicity is a modern differentiation of the obsolete concept of correspondence, sympathy, harmony. And these were earlier terms that we would use. And they're replaced by the acausal, right? A different ordering. So previous, like Gabser will talk about how in the magical, that he thinks of synchronicity as basically magical, and that it's just a given in the magic world, in the mythic world. We have power sticks and tarot and I Ching and so many things, right, that are just natural, that people work with, that are part of their life. And so that's, the magical is a sympathy, a sympathetic, right, attachment to things, a harmony, that everything, the part is part of the whole, totos part totum, is it? Yeah. Now Van France, I think, catches some of the essence of what I'm looking at. The synchronous is an act of creation. So synchronicity is this creation, this emergence that's happening, and it's not a fate, right? It's not a Nazi say, this is the way a Nazi cook or something. It's not a rigidity. It's a constant flowing and openness and creativity. I'm trying to think, there was something coming up from last year, but maybe it'll come back. So it's unique in a temporal unfolding, and we use temporal and temporality, the way Gabser would. So finally getting closer, and this isn't quite the end yet, we're surpassing causality. Jung says it's an acausal ordering, an integrative ordering. This is very interesting, and I don't know if this came before his talks with Gabser, But you see this in Jung too, and I think Jung has the same sense that Gebser does, maybe a different flavoring or a different mix of the stew of the integral, but I like that integrative ordering, that things are emerging, things are stirring, it's an atmosphere, a climate. So it's aspatial, we're coming into Gebser now, a-temporal, free from the normal limitations of locality and distance. And when I show you some images, you'll understand what I'm talking about. And again, some of it comes out of the art. I've been a photographer for many, many years, and strange things happen in the darkroom and other places. So synchronistic events are all, I would say, all temporal. This is another way to looking at it. In the integral, everything is there. It's all temporal, all times are there, and maybe it's a way we step into that space, and the way we hold that space, that makes a difference in how we work with time. And I think we can work with it. Kant would say it's a given, right? But it's only a given if that's the dominant temporality of your period. Like right now, mental rational is still dominant, although the integral is emerging. But these things take eons, right? This isn't a quick process. We shouldn't be in a rush. So it's all temporal and attached in multiple dimensions. This is getting closer, and where we go from here after some talk about my personal journey, we will go to Jung and Gebser and quantum mechanics and theory. You can't see, can you see that? Yeah. That's me lying on the bed, and there's a certain angle to it. I'm up above myself, looking down on myself, laying on my back on the bed. And this comes from, I think, senior year of college. And it was my first, well, and only really out-of-body experience of that sort. I have all kinds of, I kept dream journals for decades, and I finally threw them out and started over. And I programmed myself to only remember my dreams if they were really prophetic. And they will. Every month or two, something really powerful will pop up, and I'll work with it, sometimes for years. It'll take me to process a dream that comes up. This was a dream that I had, again, in college in Albany, New York. I was at Albany State, which is now State University of New York at Albany. And this is one of hundreds of images that are on the web, was closest to what the image I had in my dream. This was probably 66, 67, right? What could I know at that time? And you say, well, maybe it was about the atomic bomb. That was past that period, but maybe it was still some holdover. But then you see, I don't know if you can see people moving through a tunnel, and the two buildings collapsing, and the Twin Towers. These are buildings from Chicago, but the sense was there. This came out of, first I thought it came out of the darkroom, and then I remembered this period was the early 90s. I was working with an early version of Photoshop. It was one of my multi-images, and I think we're in an altered state of consciousness. And I have another one I just thought of today, it occurred to me, of a woman kind of ragged, walking through like the relics, what's left of 9/11. And I didn't think of that, or I would have put it in here. This was later, after we got married. We went to visit my aunt and uncle. And I don't know, I think we were going, my uncle had epilepsy and was having a really hard time. But my aunt, I think she gave this to us as a wedding present. It was about a year later after getting married. And she said, "You're going to the Southwest. You're going to move to the Southwest." And I thought, oh, really? Wow. She said, "I painted this picture for you." And we started the journey. I got to Chicago, and had a really good job there. John was there, and we had Gapser there a couple of times. And I thought, oh, we'll just be here a short time, right? I'm gonna move on out. And no, it was 30 years. But we did eventually, we wound up in Albuquerque, New Mexico. And this is probably Utah, but it's close enough. So quantum entanglement, Jung referred to this field as unus mundus, a unified world, an absolute knowing. And I'm not sure I totally grok that, but he talks about an absolute knowing and not a conscious knowing. And some of this, you have to look at all of his work on synchronicity and related stuff to get the fullness of it. Sometimes it's not quite right, but in the whole, it really makes sense. And I think he comes to similar places that Gapser does. So in this unified world, coincidence is only an indicator of an underlying reality. And coincidence happens, for me, it's like a normal thing. It's every day. An underlying reality of connection, surpassing the mental rational, but not leaving it behind. I've talked in other papers about Gapser's structures of consciousness are always present, like the ever-present origin. All of the consciousness modes are ever present in a mix, in a stew, whatever you like, in a vortex, somebody said earlier, right? They're all here, and maybe in different strengths, and depending on who we are and how we individuate, they may project differently. So there's an integration. All aspects of awareness are together. An awareness stew, we could say. And synchronicity is Gapser's, synchronicity is as Gapser's consciousness mix. Let's see what we got. Okay, so here we begin to, how do we work with synchronicity? How do we place ourselves in a world that we can openly accept as synchronicity, as an emergent creation? Von Franz talks about the function of the I Ching, and this kind of is the contrast. The Chinese are not interested in what they should do. They're interested is rather in the whole situation so that they can act in awareness of it. And I see so much of this. My sister was a psychic, and after my dad died, she said Jess Stern's book, Yoga, Youth, and Reincarnation, fell off the shelf. And she picked it up and she said, oh, this is interesting. And everybody in the family was doing yoga for a couple months. I kept it up. I've been doing it for over 50 years now, yoga and meditation. And some of the research indicates that people who meditate and things like that, who have a practice, experience synchronicity much more and much more intensely. So this is some other work. I have a lot of work on listening. I've been working in that field for, I don't know, since graduate school. And what I call, and this is how we place ourselves in the synchronous world. And it's listening with the field, harmonizing with the cosmos. So there's the egocentric, the mental rational level, where we are seeing in a way that we want to know what we can do. How can we control and manage this situation? There's witnessing, where we're there and present and we're watching what's happening, right? And we're not necessarily wanting to control, but we're aware, right? We're in tune with what's happening. And finally, there's participative awareness, where we are happening, we're happening with the happening of the cosmos. And Gapser would say we're participating in the integral. Very much for him, he's on two levels and it's murky. On one level, it's about this vast, the most vast that we can imagine, shift of consciousness, right? Throughout all of the Anthropocene, the human history. On another level, For Jung, too, it's about an individuation. And Gebser says that the integral is not coming until we change, until we have evolved, but evolved in the sense of grown, emerged, and so forth. So, for me, you listen and are perceptive, right? This is perceptivity. Somebody said receptivity, and that has driven my work in listening, receptivity. My guru wrote a piece on receptivity, and I thought, oh, that's it. You know, it's how we are open to the world, how we move with the world. So at the ego level, we are listening to get something done. At the witnessing level, we're watching what happens, and we can learn from that, right? At the participative level, we're happening with a happening, and things just flow, right? And like Gebser says, we decide when to take action and when to kind of just move with the happening of what's going on. And so it's that kind of a conscious awareness, a conscious flow, a conscious participation that's important here. And as we said, meditation and prayer, and I would think a contemplative prayer, not just any old prayer. I mean, it's not prayer to say, God, give me the grace to do this or that, right? It's prayer that is just present. Did we do this? No. Okay, so Jung's individuation, this is the last, I think close to the last, individuation process tends toward wholeness, as integration does for Gebser. Integrality just happens, and we participate consciously and are responsible. An everyday synchronous is not a charmed life. You know, it's not like it's hunky-dory. I had an accident a couple years ago, and I had been having flashes of an accident for several years off to my left side, like up there I would see. And you know, I mean, it was all synchronous. If the other car had seen me, they took off the first 6 or 8 inches of the front of my car. If they hadn't been talking or doing something, they could have moved a couple inches, right? And we wouldn't have had an accident, because I slammed on the brakes. But I saw that coming somehow for a long time. And I've had other experiences like that about getting a ticket, and I just had this angst for the longest time. And then finally I got 2 tickets. And I talked my way out of them. But those kind of things happen. So life is a divine play, a serendipity. It's a creative, serendipitous cosmos. And we can happen with the happening. We don't have to control everything. We just have to, if we're in tune with it, we can see when we need to really apply ourselves and move forward. And as Gebser says, when to kind of, this is his homo integer, right? The human as an integrality, right? And he's got a list of things, I don't want to read them right now, but a list of things that are characteristics of an integral person. And it's about that. It's about the play, the serendipity, the participation, right? And kind of accepting, but knowing when you don't need to accept, when you need to be all you can be, we could say, or something like that. So, I'm here. I don't know why. I don't know what it means. I don't have a clue, honest. When I look back on some of these synchronicities, we can talk more about that because I explore that more in the paper, but I don't know if Jung or Gebser knew too much more either, what I read. All right, thank you. Is there time for a question or two? Yeah? Okay.
Thank you very much, Michael. Thank you. I have a question for you that comes from experience with indigenous elders, something Toba Sanakwa Kanu once said to to me, and I'd like you to relate it to what you're talking about synchronicities, if you can.
I pulled a quote out of your book that basically ends up where I ended up.
Oh, really? Oh,
Yeah.
I don't know which one it'll be. Well, maybe it's this, but I mean, but he asked the question, what kinds of things want to happen together? I do very much too, because so that's one thing, and then I'm going to ask two questions if you don't mind. But then the other thing is the way some indigenous peoples work with what other people watching them might call omens, but I don't think that's a good enough word. So what they're really doing, generally, at least when I've hung out with Navajo, for instance, and if a coyote crosses the road, the whole show stops.
Yeah.
So if it's crossing north-south,
Yeah.
south-north, it's really bad. So the medicine man's going to get out.
That was in your book too, wasn't it?
I don't remember.
I
but
think
maybe.
so. Yeah.
But prayers have to be said, rebalancing has to be done. So it's not really an omen as much as it's already occurred. It's already occurred in their view, I would say. So how would you relate those two things?
Well, I think
things happening together and so-called omens in your way of thinking.
Well, it's not about will, about wanting, right? I mean, that really, I think, is a dead end if it's too strong. There is the life force. I mean, there's Nietzsche's, right, life force. What does he call it? Will to power. Huh? Will to power, but it's not that kind of power. It's a will to manage oneself, to participate and be creative. It's not a will to power like, the Nazis who stole it later. And the other one, I was watching a couple of shows on religions and paths, and one was Confucius. And you see that all of these ways have ways of keeping people disciplined, keeping their will, that wildness under control, the Empyrean, right? Managing the chaos that comes out of us as human beings. I mean, it's there. I was, I think, a very angry youth, but over a period I transformed that. One time my brother got behind the door and made faces at me and stuff, and I put my fist right through the window. Very thick plate glass window. I still have a scar here somewhere to remember. But I think every culture, the important ones, have ways to manage that. And for Confucius, it was rituals that kind of slowed people down, got them in rhythms, like prayer or whatever, right? And then you can pick up, like with the I Ching, you can pick up what's happening and know how to intercede, how to participate, how to work with it. And one more thing, that's how I would teach. And another big inspiration here was Arnie Mindell, because Arnie Mindell takes Jung and puts him into action. And I've been working with Mindell's workshops and processes since the early 90s, maybe 1990, early 90s, somewhere in there. And I would take it into the classroom, and I would just stand there in front of the classroom, and we'd sit in a circle usually, and get a sense of the field. What's happening here? What wants to happen, right? And it was became a little bit of a ritual like that. Okay, I'm talking.
First of all, Mike, thank you so much for the
All right.
beautiful presentation. A word that usually comes up within me when I reflect on synchronicity is pattern. It's these patterns exist and seem to fall into place that are transcending space and time. And they just emerge in a given situation. And they sort of spread out and form a pattern within a pattern within a pattern. It's a dynamic process. It's patterning.
So like archetypes, so they're kind of loose patterns. They're kind of amorphous.
That come together
Yeah.
and connect, acausally connect things. And there's meaning in that, however you don't want to define that. I mean, for me, it's a numinosity that's present.
It's what? Luminosity?
Numinosity that's present. And
What do you
all-
mean by that? Because
Well, it's being all-filled, being put into a space of some ecstatic experience. It certainly not transcends joy, happiness. It can be terrifying too. So, Jung often said synchronicities are accompanied by that sense of numinosity, because there's an archetypal patterning that's going on. And the other thought I had was, when you brought in ritual and pattern, you're talking about creating a mandala, which is something that's near and dear to my heart. And mandalas aren't just paintings. This is a mandala right here. We've created a mandala right here.
Okay.
Yeah.
Good.
Thank you.
Now, I wondered what Jung meant. I got a sense of luminosity. It's like Gebser's intensity, I think, right?
Yeah, I think there's a connection there. There's a sacredness. That's the other word that
Yeah.
comes with luminosity is sacredness.
Okay. Yeah, hi?
I wonder if you could expand on that patterning, that issue of patterning, and bring it into Merleau-Ponty, into connection with the flesh as patterning.
Well, it's hard to deal with because we think of polarities or dualities, right? And I have problems with non-duality because that already assumes you know what duality is, so you're in between, flutting back and forth between them. I don't know if this deals with what you're saying, but a couple years ago I gave a talk on different kinds of integrality, and my mentor, Al McCunis, translator of Ever-Present Origin, or co-translator, I'd read his work and edited his work on Zen. And what you see there is not the kind of integrality I think we think of with Gebser, but it's a polarity. It's a polarity of two we could say climate elements, storms or whatever, but they merge so closely that they become integral, right? And then you can go back to starting with the Greeks with reason, right? The consciousness of reason, and make an integrality out of that too, because as Nietzsche did an integrality with that, where we see all the perspectives, but we also see the field that we're standing in. Oh, how do I see this perspective and that one and that? Well, I'm somewhere else, right? I'm something more encompassing than all of those. And that was Nietzsche. And that's like a rational, or not a rational, but a reasoning integrality. And then there's, Gebser's what we usually read, the intensity of time and so forth, process. So Merleau-Ponty is, he's near that polar, right, integrality, and trying to find ways to talk about how our body is the world, and that the world reverberates. That's another concept that I like with synchronicity. It's about resonances. And the world is resonating with our body all the time, and it's more or less conscious, right? A lot of what goes on in the body and its connections with the world is not noticed even. Yeah. Oh, that help? Does that help a little?
Yeah.
Okay. Are we good?
Any other questions?
Are we good? Thanks for the energy, by the way. I was feeling really down. You were so attentive.